Well, hello, hello. It is Sarah Jane, and today I want to talk to you about why secure attachment bonds are so vital if we're going to be able to give birth to children and dreams and desires and to really make a positive impact in the world. And also why so many of my private clients, when they first come to me, they've been through every modality under the sun. They've changed their diets. They have done IVF, and even some of them who've fallen pregnant don't manage to carry full term. And where I find that the level of my success in treating infertility and endometriosis or anything to do with urinogenital irregularities or dis-ease has to do with going back to the root cause of when we formed the belief, probably as little children. This is when, hi Sue, nice to see you. This is the time when our early developmental traumas, or growing up in a dysfunctional household, or perhaps being an adult child of an alcoholic or addicted parent, we don't realize the impact that that has not only on our health but in our ability to reproduce, whether that is when I talk about conscious and subconscious, so passive and active reproduction. This isn't just about how we birth babies into the world as women, but how we birth life and love and our dreams and share our unique talents and capacities in the world with other people. And we cannot do that if we have unresolved childhood trauma that's pretty much running our show. And I just love this work, because when we sort of dive deep into those sort of root beliefs and attitudes and unspoken contracts and promises that we've made never to ever have children or never to ever create beautiful things in the world, often comes from emotional neglect, or from a childhood that has in somewhat shamed us or made us feel like we're too stupid or we don't have what it takes, or all these crazy things that we actually do, and where an ambivalence comes up around becoming a parent for so many of my clients, where they're desperate to have a baby, but perhaps their husband is the one that has unresolved childhood trauma and is terrified of becoming a parent because he doesn't want to end up being maybe the abusive parent that his parents were. So if you're ambivalent about becoming a parent, this one is for you. And even for some of us have grown up children, we know we never stop parenting our kids, and we want them to grow up with those sort of very sensitive and subtle skills of secure attachment. Especially if they've come from a home where there is abandonment or attachment issues going on and not very good, safe co-regulation. And this is the one thing that we really have in common, is that we need, what is secure attachment? Well, it's having a safe, nourishing touch. It's about having a capacity to love, have our love being received, and also to be able to give love in a safe and appropriate way. It's about being easy and relaxed and going with the flow, so that we're able to connect and to separate even under the most challenging of situations. It's about having kind eyes. It's about looking at yourself with the same kind eyes as you would to a child that's in distress, and also to be totally and absolutely present. My daughter just got back from camp today, and I really missed her, even though at the moment we're going through some teenage stuff where the boundaries are being stretched, and we're having to learn to be growth partners to navigate this uncharted territory as a mother-daughter relationship. So it's about being very mindful and aware that we have mirror neurons, and those mirror neurons we're wanting, when we connect with somebody, to know, gosh, in your company, I'm safe, I'm loved, I'm connected, my feelings matter, my truth has a place. And if you've had a trauma history, it's oftentimes very, very difficult to take that really in, that you do matter. And I think an important part of that too, and one that's often gets forgotten in this urgency or this almost obsessive compulsive need to want to fall pregnant, to have a child. And I know I certainly, at the age of 14, when I was told that, that I could never have children, nor did I want children because of the information that I'm going to share with you today, just how strong those belief systems are in literally taking the joy out of having intimacy, out of having orgasmic, juicy sex with your partner that may create a baby. But I think play and humor is probably one of the biggest nourishments to having a strong, secure attachment bond. And it just takes 2 seconds, to take a break, to go hug your cat or walk your dog, or just get out in nature and just breathe in life and appreciate the simple, ordinary pleasures that we often take for granted. So back to fertility or doubt, ambivalence and actually fear of maybe becoming a parent or being a parent, and maybe being really afraid that you're still screwing your child out because you have unhealed mother-father wounds, or you are the parentified child and you don't want to be passing on this sort of ancestral or familial trauma from your family lines. And so besides all your efforts and attempts to conceive a child, you may not be conceiving because of some of these deep-seated beliefs, and we need to get to it at the level of the nervous system. And I hear it so often where people are afraid of doing to their children what their parents did to them. And if that's you, you're not alone. Not only do I hear this from my clients, but just in conversations all the time from friends or colleagues, and just in passing online and out and about. And I think ambivalence about becoming a parent is a very real concern, and it's more common than you know. And one of the aspects of this to have or to not have children, ambivalence, that may be more unique for some of you who come from backgrounds of childhood neglect or abuse or trauma or emotional wounds, and these attachment patterns, is that fear that if we become parents, we'll inevitably mess up our children as much as we feel like maybe our parents messed us up. And we really don't want to do that. Of course not, but that fear runs very, very deep. It's a survival response, and you see this in nature out in the wild, that if there's a drought or there's been a fire and there's very little food available, you'll see all the herd of deer, all the animals in the wild. That survival instinct is so strong that it stops them going into estrus so that they don't conceive when food is short. And our nervous system, our little reptilian brain, that critter brain that's so old, it hasn't really evolved from those sort of times of the first man and the first woman that ever walked the earth to be really subtly cued into that feast and famine mentality. So even though these days, none of us are really starving, we're really lucky. We have abundant, pretty much first world lives and lifestyles. But to our nervous system, the fear of, being retrenched or not knowing if you stay home and have a child, if your husband's going to be able to provide for you, is a very, very real thing. And we get our energy, we get our vital life force energy from our father at the time of conception. So that's another thing I always inform my clients of, and what we work with pre-conception, to make sure that everything goes according to plan and to nature, that we resolve and actually make peace, and also put in some really pragmatic tools to deal with challenging times before that baby comes along. And I know I think that, again, part of being human is that we do worry that we don't know how to be good mothers and fathers, because perhaps we didn't have a model of secure attachment, and don't have any positive examples of what that can look like. Remember, we live what we learn. So if we learned that our needs are never going to be met, and that we don't know whether there's going to be dinner on the table when we get home, or if your alcoholic parent is going to be targeting you for the latest spew of emotional abuse or a litany of criticism, it's very difficult to just say, well, of course I want to have a child, if we don't look at this. And I mean, just imagine that having a child, will turn us into our mother or our father, and that's exactly what we'd most like to avoid. And oftentimes my clients worry that because of their own trauma that still feels unresolved, that they're going to lash out or overreact or really do some damage to their kids. And let's face it, we worry a lot, and we go back and forth weighing the pros and the cons of becoming a parent, and wondering if we're cut out for it, or spending so much emotional energy and time trying to figure out what we should do. And like anyone else who doesn't know 100% whether they want to become a parent or not, we spend a lot of exhausting time in ambivalence. But our ambivalence takes on its own special, and I say special with some humor, because there is a fearful flavor of what ifs and worst case scenario possibilities of maybes, and that are all informed by our own pain and sadness from our own childhood. So just remember, these fears are normal and natural, and just because you're ambivalent and have those fears doesn't mean that you shouldn't have children, or that you should regret having children. And just because those fears are normal and natural doesn't necessarily mean that you should have children. Out of my three sisters, my one sister, Debbie, just never wanted children. And we've explored this a lot about her relationship with our mother, and her experience and her story. Because remember, the brain is a story-making machine, and this is where so often you can have twins that grow up in the same house, and the both of them have a completely different story about certain challenging times growing up. So so my one sister never had children. My other two sisters have amazing children that certainly didn't grow up without adversity and family challenges, but they turned out just fine. And even when I look at my beloved Talia, she is my growth partner more than I am her mother. And I often spend a lot of time using my own experience of mothering without a manual, or wanting to do conscious parenting differently to how my parents grew me. And it's not a one size fits all, but what all these fears do mean is that you may need to do some extra inventorizing, if that's even a word. And for me, that's part of the master of being human, is it's a moment by moment presencing of catching myself and allowing my daughter to tell me when I've transgressed or when I'm not being present, and take it as a gift rather than a personal injury that I've screwed her up or I'm a terrible parent. And I think doing that deeper psychological digging that your perhaps non-traumatized peers may have to do, to understand what part of your ambivalence about becoming a parent is based in historically informed reactive fear, and to look at, what part of it is indicative of a genuine, like a really heartfelt lack of desire to have children. In all honesty, being married to a narcissist for 15 years, in my first marriage, motherhood was just not on the cards. And, you know, I validated that or made the excuse that I just didn't have time for children because my business was my baby and I had 35 employees and a lot of responsibilities in the day-to-day running and the success of that business. And I think that deep down inside, I actually knew that I did not feel safe enough nor wanted to bring children into the world with my ex-husband, who was suffering from his own chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. And that together, you know, it's one of my greatest blessings, and I have so much gratitude for the fact that I didn't have children with him. But, you know, I got to have a second chance at 40 against all odds, and I wouldn't take that back for the world. But had you asked me in my 30s, in my 40s, before, you know, I had my come to Jesus moment, if I wanted to have children, the answer was irrevocably no throughout my adulthood. So, you know, I don't have a crystal ball and I can't tell you what decisions will be best for you. But, you know, in today's little dose of body, mind, medicine, I really just wanted to offer up some ideas and some prompts to help you dig a little deeper if you personally find yourself afraid, even in part, about becoming a parent or being a good parent if you have children already, because you're afraid of replicating what was done to you and what you experienced in your own childhood. And you know, if this is resonating with you, hi Alan, I'd love to hear your questions or your insights on what good parenting or being in the right relationship with your future children or your grandchildren or the children that you have here are, because we learn and we co-regulate together. So I wanted to answer some of the questions that have been coming up over and over again in my private sessions in the hopes that maybe it'll resonate with you. And if this isn't for you, tell me what you do need, because maybe tonight's topic is not for all of you highly sensitive empaths that are part of my tribe, that choose to put your mothering skills into teaching and community outreach projects, or going to your shelters and caring for animals that have no home, or maybe just showing up and just being your beautiful self as you go about your day and just reaching out and touching people so that we can heal this sort of epidemic of loneliness that's sort of plaguing the planet right now. Pretty crazy when you think there's more than 8 billion people on the planet, and yet so many of us are feeling disconnected and alone and isolated. And I certainly know what that feels like because I've been there before. So one of the questions that I constantly get asked is, how do I know if I'm ready to have children? You know, and maybe there's some pressure on your parents to have children or start a family, or maybe your partner is ready to have children and you're not. And I think that one of the concerns almost anyone may have about becoming a parent, as I said, is wondering when you'll know when you're ready to become a parent. And I don't know if you're ever ready. But I think that for those of us who come from the backgrounds of childhood trauma or abuse or neglect, the question sort of gets amplified 100-fold. And I think one part of me wants to give that sort of trite answer almost anyone gives, that no one's ever truly ready to have children. And you just do it. Or one of my big concerns was, you know, how can I bring a child into a world that's already got too many people on it, and that the dim future of the planet because of overpopulation is a very, very real concern to me. So, you know, another part of me just wants to say that there are better times than others to have children. And maybe that's not this lifetime. I don't know what it looks like for you. But do I think that we need to have all of our crap figured out before we become parents? No, not necessarily. And actually, I think it's a very high standard to ever even think that we could. have everything sorted out, because we come into this life to grow and evolve and to be the best person that we possibly can be. And I don't think that the work ever stops. But I do think that the best time to have children is when you're trapped. Not to have children is when you're trapped in a violent, abusive relationship with, $3 to your name. And when you have stomach ulcers from working 100 hours a week at your law firm, that's where nature over nurture often comes into play. And if we were to be like animals in the wild when we were in a famine or a time that is incredibly dangerous, whether that's environmental or natural or man-made things that are threatening the very survival of your life, that nature would normally stop you. And fortunately and unfortunately, science is defying, is oftentimes at odds with a natural course of when we should have children, with fertility pills and IVF treatments and all sorts of other interventions these days. Even though every cell in your body is saying now is not the time, again, we can become so obsessed. I did it myself. I saw it with many of my clients, where the only thing they can think of is falling pregnant. So yes, there may not be a perfect time to have children, but there are elements that are more ideal than others to have in place before you even begin to consider bringing another life into the world. And I think it's important also to remember that your history, your historical culture, I always say it's history, it's not means for hysteria or victimology, but to just know that your history is not your destiny. And if we are coming from a background of trauma or abuse or neglect, we will have been impacted by this period. It's non-negotiable. It's the reality of it. And how we've been impacted looks different for each of us. And I've spoken extensively and written about that and the impacts of early childhood trauma in many of my other videos and blog posts. So just know for now that it is our responsibility as adults that when we move from the survival years of childhood and adolescence to hopefully a much more empowered and choiceful adulthood, to do our own healing work at the level of the nervous system to recover, to reclaim our power from such adverse early beginnings and the unique impacts our past has had on us. And that work might include turning towards your past to get really curious about the stories that you're telling yourself that are playing out over and over again. And to bring more compassion, into your life, and to be compassionate others so that we can begin to soothe the shame and the pain from those hard years. Because if you kind of get an ambivalent attachment style person and a disorganized attachment style person in the same room, and I'm using my own life as an example, and you decide, okay, let's have a baby, that you may want to really go deep into the shadow work and also the shadow work of your beloved partner, so that you can really start to get very clear what that would look like for you. And in so doing, learn to feel more and more of your emotions and your feelings, and be in a place where you're safely enough embodied to express your feelings, which includes letting yourself grieve for what was lost and what will never be. And being more curious, as I said, being playful, but also mindful about how your past and the ways that you cope to survive may still be playing out today, especially around fertility or a good reproductive health, whether you are menstruating or peri or post-menopausal. That is the womb space, is the place of birthing of dreams. And we need a healthy reproductive system if we're going to go out and share our gifts with the world too, and make a positive impact. So we need to really start to maybe learn what those attachment styles were for the first time, and what healthy functional relationships might look like, so that you can start cultivating different choices for how you want to cope, that may be more constructive before you even start talking about babies. And I think the ultimate task is really getting clear about the kind of life that you want to build for yourself with your partner and moving towards it, being on common ground. And I know, a lot of well-meaning people, before they fell pregnant, they went to marriage counselors. They tried to, create like a 10 or a 20 or a 30-year plan. And a lot of the times there's that can be challenging, because all of these unresolved childhood wounds come to the surface, and it's not you, the adult, that wants to have a child running your life anymore. It's the wounded child that's deeply seeking connection and a sense of safety and belonging with you first. So, getting clear about the kind of life that you want to build for yourself and what that future might look for you, as beautiful as it can be. You need to do this deep work in healing from your adverse early beginnings. And this probably sounds like a lot of work. And I always say it takes work. It's simple. It's not always easy. And, honestly, it's going to be work. But I think that when you weigh out what it's costing you to stay stuck in the self-abuse, in the self-judgment, in the fear of what if, and the regret of what could have been, is the greatest disservice that you could do to yourself. And work is the biggest gift that you could give yourself, is to do the work at the level of your nervous system. And what I also hope that you hear me saying is that no matter where you started from, your history is not your destiny. Your biology does not become your biography. If you've read Donna Kowalski's book, what is it called? I've completely gone black. But yeah, how your childhood disrupted doesn't need to make you sick later on in life if you work on this at a subconscious level now. So even though you could have quite negatively been impacted by adverse childhood experiences or chronic unpredictable toxic stresses or narcissistic abuse or being an adult child of an alcoholic or addictive parent, you just need to know that yes, you went through that, and you can still be a really good parent. Another book that was coming to mind when I was trying to think of Donna's book is A Boy Called It, which is probably one of the most heartbreaking, and apparently was the worst reported abuse case of child abuse in America. It's a heart-wrenching read, but it's also a very uplifting and hopeful read, that regardless of what trauma you've been through, you can transform through it and not make that a self-fulfilling prophecy that you pass on all of that unresolved trauma to your unborn children, or the children that you already have, or your grandchildren. We can work with this at the level of epigenetic markers and turn it off when it's done in a functional and integrative way, which is what my work is all about. So just know that if part of your fear and ambivalence about becoming a parent is rooted in the fear of replicating your past and your concerns about how damaged you are from it, just spend some time in self-reflection and ask yourself honestly if perhaps you're selling yourself short in some way. Reflect on what I've spoken about so far, and just see if you have indeed done some or much of that nervous system healing work to recover from your past and to develop some level of psychological security in yourself, and be curious about where you still might have growth opportunities. But remember, realistically, there's never a finish line with any of those healing tasks. There's always going to be more work that can and needs to be done. So just reflect on the level of psychological security that you've already been able to cultivate inside yourself, and the ways in which you're continuing to do so. And just remember that when you arrive at parenting with some level of emotional resilience and psychological security established inside of you, right? That secure embodiment, you're increasing the odds that you won't respond in that same dysfunctional ways as your own parents perhaps did. And in that way, the more that you do your inner work, your personal work, your somatic release, your breath work, your lifestyle changes, your working at the level of the nervous system, to heal some of this intergenerational and ancestral and familial and your own trauma, the more you have some sort of degree over not inevitably replicating your past. And also remember that intention counts for a lot, which is why I love guided visualization and self-hypnosis tracks, which are often what I give to my clients that are waiting to call in their baby. And are ready to conceive. So just remember your intention about your desire, and you have to be really, really honest whether you really want this or not, is to keep healing, and growing counts for so much, and so does your intention to be a good parent. And the fact that even that you might have mindfulness about not wanting to recreate trauma or a poor childhood experience for your own child, it speaks volumes about the level of awareness and care that you have already, and that your parents may not have considered or prioritized. And I truly believe that. I've seen it time and time again, where my clients get pregnant and they birth healthy babies, and their relationships with their partners is stronger because they did the work beforehand. And they cleared out a lot of these subconscious beliefs and programming about parenting and responsibility and, what that's gonna look like. And that's where things change, when you start to reduce that risk that you'll mess up your child as much as you are messed up. And it's also, I think, important to be intentional about what kind of parent you'd like to be for your child, particularly if you're afraid of becoming your own mother or your own father to them. And when we're weighing the decision of whether or not to have children, I think a helpful mental exercise can be clarifying what your own personal idea of what it means for you to be a conscious parent. And then to also reflect, on what choices and characteristics would go into such a parenting experience. Where could you, take the best of what you did have? Because our parents did the best with what they had. And, nobody goes out and intentionally sets out to mess up their kids. It just happens because nobody was talking about ACEs or unresolved childhood experiences or trauma wounds and attachment patterns up until recently. So if you're terrified, for example, of becoming financially disempowered or overworked or exhausted, or the bitter martyr who gave up her own dreams and well-being to have children, like your mother and grandmother did, imagine what the opposite of that would look like, and what it would take to be that, to look at who would you become as the mother, the father that you never had. And what would love look like when you were in that role of the conscious parent? And would this be a woman who, perhaps chose not to have as many children as they did? And would it mean becoming a woman who wasn't a stay-at-home mom because she was taught she should, and who instead persisted in her education and career development? Or would this mean making choices to sort of outsource housekeeping or grocery shopping or childcare so that she could have a more spacious and more spaciousness and ease while being a parent? these are generative questions, and I think we need to ask them all the time, regardless of whether we're birthing children or birthing our work in the world. It demands the same loving attention and very compassionate inquiry. And another one would be to look at what would it mean marrying a partner who supports her professional and personal ambitions, or his, and who doesn't pressure herself into making choices she truly doesn't want or he truly doesn't want. And if your intention is to be a mother who's both a mom and who has a fulfilling, meaningful career and who's happy in her life, then that is possible for you. And it may require you to make very strategic choices about who you have a child with and how you manage the many pieces of your life to accommodate raising a child and persisting in your own dreams and desires. And you can be a very different kind of parent than your own mother or father was, and it may take more intentionality and more work. But excuse me, but what are the rewards, when you start to look at where the good models can come into play to support you and to show you a different possibility of what it means to be what I call a bad parent, that I don't parent according to mainstream norms and cultural societies. I parent as best as I know and can for my sensitive, empathic daughter who chose me to be her mother and obviously had some insight into the qualities and attributes that she could grow from me, and likewise from my husband. So that's it. What else did I want to talk about? I think belief is so important, and it's hard to be what you can't see. So that's where it's also helpful to actively look for working models for people and mentors and friends who are doing a great job parenting and who maybe did come from challenging backgrounds. I think we're all, we all have our own stories of trauma wounds in our family of origins, and yet despite them, there are many people who are doing a great job, and you can have that too. So if you don't know any of those kind of people in your life, I'm just thinking about my wonderful friend Lisa, Nicole, who's an amazing mother. And I always admired the way that her husband and her dovetailed so beautifully in raising incredible young adults into the world who are doing great things, even though their relationship wasn't always plain sailing. And they found a way because their integrity and their values, their core values for their kids, was aligned. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest pain points in most partnerships is that these conversations weren't had and aren't had in a sort of renewal cycle of every year of, okay, what are our goals for this year and where do we want to be? And to really get clear on that. So if you don't know people that are modeling that for you, ask around. There's amazing books and biographies and movies about great ways to parent, and how awfully wrong it can go as well, and yet we still come out of it more resilient and more empowered when we move through the challenges rather than resisting them. So ask people you trust about who they know, who perhaps came from adversity or really tough beginnings, but are doing really, really well now, and who happen to be parents. And I think there are actually many of us out there who came from really challenging beginnings, but are now doing well in life. And some of us are public about our stories, and some of us are harder to find, but we're out there. So look for those models and allow them to provide evidence that just because you had a screwed up childhood yourself doesn't mean that you're going to replicate that with your children. In fact, I really, really believe that you can come from a really hard, adverse background and still be an amazing parent to your children and live a life that feels good to you. You know, that's the right relationship. It's a win. It's a win-win when there's secure attachment. And I think importantly, remember that no matter how much you do your own personal work, no matter how great your intentions are, or no matter how many positive parenting examples you find and try to model yourself, you will screw up. It's inevitable. You know, it's like saying, just because I've learned to co-regulate and handle toxic stresses in my life, that I'm never going to be stressed again. You know, stress is a part of life. We're living in very challenging, very, very stressful times, and there is no manual for any of it. So just know that, you know, that the good enough parent, which was an idea coined, I think, by Donald Winnicott, who was a pediatrician. He basically says that a good enough parent is one where the parent has some good, sound, nurturing instincts and devotion to the child and kind eyes and good sort of regulation. And remember too, we only need safety 20% of the time anyway, and so do our children. But ultimately, even with all those great instincts, and I think we're all natural nurturers by default of being human, it's our instinct to nurture and to nourish and to keep the innocence and the little ones safe. It's just built into us. And you can see that just as, you know, from childhood, how we nurtured and loved our dolls, or if you played with dolls, or you cared for your puppy or your kitten, or your pony. And that's what I love about the sort of good enough model, is that you're good enough, and to believe it, and to know that you can help your children to learn to cope with and face an imperfect world, including yourself as an imperfect parent. I think a key developmental task that children have to face, and we all did, is our own emotional growth towards adulthood. It's part of the rite of passage. And I think an important caveat of screwing up and failing as parents, it doesn't really include egregious harm. You know, we're not talking about the big T traumas like the ACEs, but also the little T's, you know, the verbal and emotional abuse. It definitely means having to maybe from time to time miss your child's hockey match because of unavoidable work commitments. There's a big difference. So, you know, no matter how much that we do our own healing work, no matter how great our intentions are to be good parents, no matter how many positive parenting examples, as I said, that we've had in our lives, your unresolved childhood stuff is going to get triggered. And I always say to my clients, is what a beautiful opportunity that you get to grow up your child parts, your fragmented parts, the dissociated parts of you. You get to remother them, to grow them up alongside your own children in a loving, kind, and compassionate way. So, you know, everything is an opportunity. And I think that's why I love calling children growth partners, because they're here to grow us as much as we're here to grow them. And they really don't need us as much as we think they do. You know, that's just the ego and the mind that wants to feel like we're needed. So just know it's all okay and it's totally normal. And yes, your child might need therapy someday. Too, you know, I took it upon myself when I started to see how angry my daughter was getting, and she's with her struggling with puberty, but not only that, a lot of instability in our home, and with me, being away for 4 months at the beginning of the year and about to leave her again. I want to make sure that she's in the best possible hands to be able to work through this and restore her own sense of internal safety and self-regulation. And hopefully, it won't be extensive therapy that any of our children need to do if we're doing our childhood trauma recovery work with them on a daily basis. So just give yourself some compassion and some grace. If you're scared to have children, or you have children and you're terrified and you're thinking, oh my gosh, what have I done because of your own messed up childhood? You may mess up with your kids, but if you can improve upon the parenting efforts of your parents and their parents before you, can that be good enough? Can you allow yourself to believe in the concept of the good enough parent? And does that kind of placate or soothe or relax any part of you that may be ambivalent about becoming a parent for fear that you have to get it perfect? So in wrapping this up, I know it's a Friday night and I've been talking for quite a while now. I just want to sort of leave you with a sort of final sort of wrapping this all up, that I think too, that when we're trying to decide whether or not we want to have children because of whatever your reasons, it's important to remember the subjective context in which what happened to you occurred. If your parents were really, really young, if your mother was, pregnant with you as an unwed teenager, in those days there was a lot of shame around that. Or if, and let's face it, most of these children that are 13 and 14, they're children themselves. They haven't even developed their full nervous system regulation to know what's right or wrong, or what to do in times of emotional turmoil. That part of the brain hasn't even developed until they're 18. And if if your parents were those, or they had untreated mental health issues, like for my dad, I know that he was actually drinking to cope with chronic depression. His father had it and he had it. Other times there was, financial insobriety. And they were trying to navigate all of this territory with no working model themselves. And maybe they were in abusive relationships. And I know so many. My mother was one of them who, stayed in the abusive marriage for the sake of the children, which actually, children know a lot more than we think that they know. And all I wanted for years was my mother to just leave and have a life and be happy again. So, oh gosh, that I could talk about this topic for ages, and maybe I'll get deeper into the sort of energetics of this, and will help you work through some of your blocks and trauma patterns that might be stopping you from falling pregnant. So I work with one of the top fertility experts in Johannesburg, and this is sort of our daily conversation when we're working with clients who are on their second or third round of IVF, and it's heartbreaking to watch, but nobody can do this healing for you. So just know, that you can and will do the best you possibly can. And the power of choice is yours. You get to choose. And this is, I want you to be pro-choice, in that I want you to help create more flexible and nuance in your ambivalence about becoming a parent or being a parent, or any anger or frustration that you have around parenting your children. And if any part of that ambivalence or all of it is rooted with a historically informed reactive fear to not wanting to recreate your own childhood experiences, just know it's totally normal. And I believe with every fiber in my body that it's every woman's right to have bodily sovereignty and control over her reproductive rights as well. Gosh, I don't know if you watch the Handmaid's Tale, but that is like pretty extreme when you kind of follow the emotional effect that kind of scenario has had, not only on the handmaids but the Marthas and everyone that was involved in building that crazy messed up society. And the victims of that too were the children that were ripped away from their birth mothers and given to strangers to grow up as their own. So just know that this is complex, and yes, it does take time. But I've had too many great success stories of my clients falling pregnant and birthing their babies and bringing them to me for sessions now, to not let you know that you've got this and you can. When you start to become more trauma informed and you start looking at your resistance or your ambivalence about what parenting would mean, everything starts to change, because it's no longer reactive fear that you're coming from. And because you're operating reactively when you're making a decision from a place of not feeling like there's any other option, that's not a choiceful place. And I want every single one of you that's listening to this, or whoever you share this with, please share it. If there are people that that are desperate to have children and are perhaps struggling with endometriosis, or women that are battling from ovarian cancers, all of that disease comes from not having secure attachment and these unresolved childhood wounds. And you can heal even from the worst of mystery diseases that are out there when you do the work at the level of your nervous system. And you start to, imagine what's possible when you have choice to work with your body's innate wisdom, when you make a choice to work with your nervous system and start to understand how you're wired and how some of those faulty programs might be tripping up your ability to fall pregnant or to mother, or to be an emotionally secure attached mother or father or brother or sister or lover, whatever it is for you. It all comes from from the same place. And the good news is that anything is possible. Anything is possible with the right support, with the right tools, the right time, in the right order. You can heal from trauma, and you can birth beautiful things, including children, into the world. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you're listening to this on the replay, please post your comments and let me know what this brought up for you, either as someone that never wanted to have children or has children and they've grown up and left the nest, or you're maybe just starting out and considering that you want to bring a child into the world. So let me know, what else would you say to somebody who feels ambivalent about becoming a parent for fear of replicating what they experienced in their childhood? Or, what would you say to somebody that is really in pain because they so desperately want to have a child, and yet so far they're not there? So that's it. Gosh, I've been talking for nearly an hour. Have a beautiful rest of your Friday wherever you are. And above all, if nobody told you today, I see you, I love you, and I honor you on your journey. You're amazing. You've got this, and I'm here cheering you on. So have a beautiful week. Take time to restore. As I wrote in my blog that's coming out tomorrow, we're into a new month, the final stretch of 2019, and a new moon in Virgo, which is really calling us to embody the womb space of the divine feminine, to come back to the heart, to know that we're not separate from Gaia, from Mother Nature, that she is as much a part of us as we are of her. And until we start to take care of our own internal climate, our own internal nature, we can't care for nature and the sentience and put our beautiful time and energy and precious resources into the things that we care about, as things really speed up at breakneck speed, to some of the heartache and the injustices and imbalances that we're seeing in the world, and her nature, herself is burning up and clearing herself out, and preparing that fertile ground for new seeds and new life to come forth. And as we sort of head into spring and into actually tending to the seeds we planted in our wintertime here in the south, in the north, you're kind of moving back into that cycle of rest, of bringing your energy down to the roots, into a contraction phase of nourishing the roots so that you can prepare for a new harvest, a new spring, as you go into winter. So take time to connect with nature and give deep appreciation for the ordinary, beautiful things that she offers up and gives and gives and gives of herself, not non-stop, and look to where we can do more of that generosity of giving from an open heart. And I'll meet you there. All right, lots of love, everyone. Bye.